As we're moving into rhythmic eating, it can be very different for people of different constitutions. And I'm going to go over the three main digestive imbalances of the different constitutions that rhythmic eating can really help. And we'll also talk about how to adjust for the type that you are. So if you know your constitution, that very much helps. Your constitution and the nature of a digestive imbalance can sometimes be different. So it's important to keep that in mind, and it just adds the different factor in, both of which you're going to want to account for and begin to navigate. So we'll start with Vata type constitution. So Vata type often have a very irregular eating habits. They often have no clear rhythm with when they're eating in terms of the time of day. They're not like clockwork where it's 3 p.m. and they have lunch. Right? Like that's not usually what they do. This is often not on their cycle of normal. So for Vata types that have this pattern, often there's a lot of gas and there's bloating. There's a lot of excess air. There's like these bubbles of gas in their constitution, and they get bloated. They have often a tendency towards constipation because Vata inherently is dry. The Vata type, and you can see as I was drawing over here, there's it's very long, and it can be very long and thin and angular and light. The underlying constitution can still hold excess weight. So you can have a Vata who's 50 pounds overweight, but underneath it all, they're a tall, lanky, thin person, as opposed to a Kapha type, a big bone person, or a Pitta type, which will have usually more broad shoulders, narrow waist, more of an angular body, but with a little bit more musculature than naturally than a Vata type. So the Vata types often come into rhythmic eating with some sort of, or to some degree or another, of a Tikshna Agni pattern. Now, Agni, remember, is your digestive fire. This is the fire that burns the food that you're putting in your body and turns it into energy that turns it into tissue. So again, Vata types are going to have often the most irregularity of rhythm to overcome. And it's important to just, if that's you, to notice like the name of the game is going to be rhythm. The name of the game is going to be starting to pull in a time for fasting. And just, this is your cutoff time and this is your start time. Another good thing is that one meal a day is at the same time. Your big meal of the day is at the same time every day. For Tikshna Agni, this will help because you'll start to notice a relationship between cause and effect. You'll start to notice like, I get less bloated when I eat my biggest meal in the middle of the day, maybe between 12 and 2 is when I make sure I eat. And you'll start to notice your Agni, your digestive fire, will actually start to rise to the occasion. And it'll be there to meet you with hunger or a sense of readiness to digest. And that is the best aperitif. Agni is always the best aperitif. It gives you the power to digest the meal that you are about to eat. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Pitta type then. So the Pitta type, they usually, if they're out of balance coming into rhythmic eating, they often will have something called Tikshna Agni. And Tikshna Agni is, instead of being a variable Agni, and Vishama means variable, I'll write that in here. It means that there's too much variability, there's too much change. Tikshna Agni is really hot. It's really sharp. And this causes a sense of, here's your digestive fire, right? It's just like hot and it's frequent. It flares up and it like sends off sparks, right? So it's super hot fire. And often this kind of person will have a very fast metabolism and they'll find they need to eat multiple times a day. I was talking with a yoga health coach whose husband had Tikshna Agni and was getting heartburn and was drinking a lot of coffee and was eating about every 2 hours or at least 6 small meals a day just to feed their fire and to kind of keep their mental focus, their brain going. And I often, when this pattern kind of comes into rhythmic eating, they're really worried about how am I going to go more than 2 to 3 hours between meals. The Vata type, it's important to realize that the Tikshna Agni, I drew it in blue over here, it's cold. Right? Its nature is actually not hot. Vishama is cold by nature, whereas Tikshna Agni is super hot. And it's so hot that it's sending off spark, you're sending off flames. And there's often this sense of in the body that you're just burning through calories. You may have loose stools, whereas the Vishama Agni will have variable stools, sometimes with constipation. So for a Pitta type or a Tikshna Agni type coming into rhythmic eating, again, you're going to want to have that big meal at the same time. That's more or less going to be the same for everybody. It's very hard often for the Vatas to commit, but once they do and they see the benefit of it, they start to see, wow, when I do that, everything else starts to fall into place for me. Now for the Pitta types, they might be going from 6 small meals a day to just 3 meals a day. And this might be, honestly, just really kind of getting, it might in the beginning be like 3 quite big meals, because they might be going from, again, snacking quite a bit and just having some time between meals. Hydrating is huge for people with Tikshna Agni. They're often fighting dehydration quite a bit because their physiology just runs hot and they need more hydration than a typical Vata body type. This can be really important. A Pitta type and a Vata type also might not be looking at going to a 16-8. They might not be able to do a 16-8 right off the bat. They might be much better off with 14 hours of fasting and 10 hours in their feed time schedule. This can be true also for the Vata type. So both the Vata and Pitta, especially in transitioning, it doesn't mean they won't ever get to a longer fasting time. They actually generally naturally very much will. But just starting that way and then eventually going over time and maybe migrating to a 16-8. I'm going to put a question mark there because it might actually not be necessary. It might be better for that body type, for that kind of person, depending on their health history, etc., to just have a little bit more time. And that's great, and that's fine. And same thing with Pitta. I mean, Pittas are often really determined to experience the deep results of deeper rhythmic eating. And so mind over matter, they might really try to push their body into a 16-8 prematurely. And just to notice, like, okay, 16 hours of fast time, 8 hours of feed time, that might be too much, and it might actually kind of disrupt their Pitta, and they might experience more Tikshna Agni. Whereas if they go to a 14-10, if they start a little bit smaller, they might find that, all right, I can slowly transition. And what happens is that my Agni, my digestive fire, it starts to become what's called Sama Agni. And that is balanced Agni, where they no longer have this intensity of appetite. They can actually go longer periods of time. They don't get hangry anymore. The loose stools that are a process of excess Tikshna Agni or excess even bile in the digestive tract produced by excess Pitta, that starts to go away. All right, so lastly, let's talk about the Kapha body type. Kapha body types tend to have Manda Agni, and Manda Agni is slow. So what characterizes Pitta is sharp, Vishama for Vatas is variable, and Manda is slow, meaning things are just really at a much slower vibration, and there's often a heaviness, and it's often there's a dampness to Manda Agni. Whereas Vishama Agni will have a dryness along with a coldness, and it'll again be chiefly variable. Tikshna Agni will be hot and it's going to be sharp. Manda Agni is going to be slow, heavy, and damp. And this is really when we look at the 1 to 2 meal a day people that are just cruising on, they just need one good meal a day and maybe a little something here or there. But usually they're a Kapha body type, and just because their physiology is naturally moving at a slower rate. Their aging process is also much slower than the Vata types, which have so much movement. Vata literally means the wind. It means this movement force. Whereas Kapha is to nourish and flourish. So it's already watery, it's heavy, it's damp, it's in this state of regeneration just naturally. And so for Kapha types, often there's an attachment to food, and that really gets in the way. So often coming in, they'll have more dampness in their constitution. They'll have excess body weight because their fasting time will not be long enough. When we look at Kaphas, it's really easy for them to actually go to a 16-8 right away, and they may even go more towards an 18-6 eventually, where they have 18 hours of fasting time and only a 6-hour feeding window. And what that allows them to do is start to bring some of the excess padding. If they have a lot of excess body weight, it allows them to bring this sort of excess that's kind of just gathering on their hips, their thighs, their torso, and it allows them to start to actually digest it. And so often a Kapha with a good rhythmic eating pattern that's allowing for a long enough fasting time, and again, We're talking here like 1 to 2 meals a day is usually ideal. And again, there's not as much of, like, it's not usually hard for a kapha to do this. They start to do this and they start to notice, like, I'm just not that hungry. Like, my body's just running so mellow on fat. I don't have these spikes naturally anyways. I was eating more for attachment or due to, social patterns. And just simply attuning to, like, oh, I only need 1 to 2 meals a day. That can help a kapha so much. And what happens is they start to actually get quite svelte, and they're strong, they get muscular, but they actually get really quite svelte in the process, and they start to experience so much more endurance. They start to experience so much more energy, and their emotions become much more light and expansive than when they had that Manda Agni pattern. And this is truly remarkable for someone who's always felt heavy, slow, damp, whose body's naturally created a lot of mucus. All of that is part of that Manda Agni pattern. When we digest that, heavy gookiness, it's amazing how clear-minded, how focused, how on point, how emotionally available a kapha body type will become. So this is a little bit of an introduction in terms of the different body types and how to start to shift into rhythmic eating in a way that's really deeply cooperating with A, your constitution, and B, if you have an imbalance in Agni, whether it's the Vishama Agni pattern or the Tikshna Agni pattern or the Manda Agni pattern, that you actually cooperate with what's going on in your physiology right now and just slowly start to adjust, move that needle to when's my feeding time, when's my fasting time, what's a good number of meals a day. Again, Vata and Pitta types, a Vata type might do 2 small, 1 big meals. A Pitta type who's burning more naturally might find like 3 equi-spaced meals, and eventually they might get to a 16-8. Eventually they might get to 2 meals a day very naturally, not in a mind over matter way, but in a matter over mind way, where their physiology is just saying, like, the Tikshna's gone, the excess Pitta's gone, they're using everything that they're putting into their body. And as they get older, as they go more, say they're in their 30s, as they go more into their 40s, 50s, they might notice that, this is actually all I need. Or they're already in their 50s, 60s, but they've had this multiple meal a day. They might just naturally notice, like, wow, this is all I really need. 2 meals a day. Okay. And I'm cool. So your next action is just to see, hey, what's my pattern? Write it down. Like, I'm this constitution. This is the type of Agni I have, and this is going to be my plan with rhythmic eating for this next week, 2 month, and this is how many meals I'm going to have. This is my fasting feeding time, and go from there.